Continuing on with chapter 15, let's turn the page to 446. We can see here a picture of a dam, and in green we have some of the positives of dams from generating electricity in hydroelectric dams. Not all dams are hydroelectric, but a lot of them are. Castaic Lake has dams, but it's not hydroelectric. It's just to hold back water for drinking. Crop irrigation and drinking water. So you create a reservoir, which is a man-made lake behind the dam, and then you can divert that water through aqueducts for agriculture and for cities, and create boating places, and that's a new recreational opportunity. In red, we have the disadvantages of dams, and again, you need to know both advantages and disadvantages and be able to write about them. When you turn a river into a lake, so when you dam a river, you build a lake behind it, and it destroys a lot of people's homes, and so you have a population displacement. You have to move a lot of people from their homes because their homes are now underwater. Behind a dam, you build up sediments, and very often those sediments have to then be removed because they build up and build up and build up. And then also you have the risk of failure. We had a dam fail in Santa Clarita about, goodness, I think it was the 1930s. It was up San Francisco Canyon Road. The dam failed and flooded all of Santa Clarita Valley, and several hundred died through that flood. Habitat alteration upstream and downstream. Okay, so upstream, you no longer have a river, and so the species that are river-type species they've lost their habitat. And lake species will move in, but the river species lost their habitat. And downstream, the water level drops downstream because you hold the water up here, that you have a lower water level for species as well. And then also, if you have fish that migrate up rivers to spawn, like salmon do and some trout, and if you block them, then though they can't spawn, they can't make babies, and the species decline. This poor guy wants to inner tube, and he can't. Look how big he is compared to the dam. That's a really large person. And you also disrupt flooding. And again, flooding is important for nutrients. And if you disrupt that, you won't get the nutrients. So make sure you know the chart here and the picture. Be able to describe a couple of positives and negatives. So benefits and costs is really the best term. Benefits and costs for dams. All right, at the bottom here of page 447, we have the Three Gorges Dam in China. It is the world's largest dam, and it opened just a couple of years ago and submerged homes, farms, and displaced 1 million people, so China had to move 1 million people. It also flooded very important ancient archaeological sites behind the dam into a river, so it turned the river into a lake behind the dam. You need to know that, again, the largest river is the largest dam in the world is the Three Gorges Dam. It produces a lot of electricity, though. Clean electricity. That's a good part of it. The electricity that comes from dams, which we call hydroelectric power, has no air pollution, which is great. All right, so there's a lot of talk about removing dams, and the benefits to removing dams is you restore a riparian habitat. Remember, riparian means river. You then open up for more river recreation, and you also allow for salmon spawning, so salmon can swim up the stream. Sorry about my fingers, it's terrible filming. Can swim up the stream to spawn. Hetch Hetchy is a dam that's actually in Yosemite National Park, and it was dammed in the 1920s, even though Yosemite was already a national park, and we've already learned that national parks you can't do things like that in. But they made an exception in the 1920s. John Muir opposed it vehemently because basically it took a gorgeous valley and it absolutely destroyed it. It is the water supply and electricity for San Francisco. And so there's talks to remove Hetch Hetchy Dam. We can replace the electricity with other things like solar and wind for San Francisco, but it's really hard to replace the water supply. So until we figure out a new water supply for San Francisco, the dam will stay. Turning the page to 450. Talks about desalinization plants which turn ocean water into fresh water. Most are in the Middle East because you have to burn a lot of fuel to take the salt out of water, and burning that fuel is very expensive. And the Middle East has a lot of oil, so they have cheap fossil fuels, so they burn those fossil fuels to desalinize water. So again, you need to know that most of them are in the Middle East. Over here, and I have the sticky note kind of in the wrong place. Let's put it here. So we have the title here. We can lessen residential, municipal, and water use in many ways. You know, actually, my sticky note was in the right place. It's right here. Agriculture demand can be reduced. So know several ways to be able to write about how to reduce agricultural water use. Know several ways for your test. And also know several ways to reduce, now here's my correct place, household and industrial water use as well, and be able to write about those. Some of them are easy. In your house, what do you do to reduce water use? Well, you take shorter showers. You use a low-flow shower head, low-flow toilets. You put a timer in your shower. You plant drought-resistant plants. Those are all things that you can do to reduce your household water use. Industrial is a little bit different. Industrial use, if industry goes in and figures out how to stop leaks in their factories, water leaks, they can actually save a lot of money on their water bill. So it does behoove industry to lessen their water use economically. We've talked a little bit about agricultural water use. We talked things about drip irrigation and planting crops that don't need so much water if you live in an arid, dry area. Water sensors. Those are all some ways to reduce agricultural water use. All right, the next page we have a picture that compares non-point source water pollution and point source water pollution. The difference is if you can point to the source, it's point source. In other words, it's this sewage treatment plant, it's this feedlot, it's this factory, and they're the ones dumping this into a body of water. If it's a bunch of things together, like all of these houses that fertilize their lawn and the fertilizer runs into storm drains and into the ocean, or a bunch of different construction sites, or a bunch of different things coming together and going into a body of water, and you can't really pinpoint it to one thing, that is called non-point source. So make sure you study the drawings of point source and non-point source pollution and be able to describe them. Here we have a picture of oligotrophic and eutrophic lakes, and we talked about those earlier. And you can see the difference. Oligotrophic has very clear water, and eutrophication, the plants are choking up the water here. There's too many nutrients and too many plants and algae and things. These are two pieces of information you need to know for your test. In fresh water, it's an excess of phosphorus. Too much phosphorus causes eutrophication in fresh water, rivers and lakes. In the ocean, it's usually nitrogen that causes eutrophication in the oceans. And again, we've talked about eutrophication quite a lot in the ocean. All right, down here we start talking about pathogens and waterborne diseases. Over 1 billion people on this planet do not have access to clean water. It's contaminated with diseases, mostly in Asia and Africa. That's a lot of people. That's 1 out of 7 people. And there's a lot of companies and organizations, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, that are trying to help people purify their water And not just boiling, because boiling takes fuel and you have to cut down trees and things which are in short supply in a lot of places to boil water. So giving them filters, giving them filtering straws, giving them other methods, iodine tablets, things like that to kill pathogens in the water like cholera and cryptosporidium, giardia. We learned those in the last chapter. On the next page, 454, we have the definition of sediments. And sediments, I'm waiting for my camera to adjust its lighting. Wait a second. All right, sediments can get into the water from floods, from mining runoff, erosion, from logging, from building homes. And if you have a lot of sediments in the water, it's going to change the habitat. You also need to know here about thermal pollution, and thermal pollution lowers dissolved oxygen and therefore the organisms. Now, thermal pollution, how does water get warmer? Well, if you cut down a forest and it no longer shades the water, the trees aren't there to shade the water gets hotter and therefore holds less oxygen. That's just a scientific principle. Warmer water holds less oxygen. Nuclear power plants, they discharge water in their cooling process, and if they discharge warm water that has been used to cool nuclear rods, now this is not radioactive water, this is just regular water, but that warmer water, if they discharge it while it's still warm into a lake or the ocean or a river, it can again lower the dissolved oxygen, and then you can have less critters there because they need oxygen. The water quality lab is important to study. You need to know the different kinds of tests we did for water quality and be able to describe some on an FRQ. On the next page here, 455, aquifer handout. You have a handout that you studied aquifers. Make sure you study that for your test. You also need to know that pollution stays in groundwater for years. So if your aquifers and your groundwater get polluted, it's going to take a long time for that pollution to get out of groundwater. It's pretty awful. Groundwater pollution can come from these sources: industry, underground storage tank, like think of a gas station. The gas is all underground. If the gas leaks and gets into your aquifer, that's pretty bad. Agriculture, sometimes fertilizers and things can soak into the groundwater. They can leach. It's called leaching. And sometimes human sewage can make its way into an aquifer as well. On the next page, we have the Clean Water Act. This is page 456. The Clean Water Act makes it illegal to discharge pollutants from a point source without a permit. So in other words, if you're a factory and you want to get rid of your waste, you have to get a permit to dump it into a lake or river, etc. It sets standards for industrial wastewater. It sets standards for contaminants in surface water. And it also, when they passed it, funded new wastewater and sewage treatment plants. So when the Clean Water Act passed first in the 60s and 70s, it really cleaned up our lakes and rivers. We used to not be able to swim in some of our lakes and rivers, but because of the Clean Water Act, we can now.